Mate, 17 years of marriage, and he just chucked it all in. No warning, just a quiet, "I'm done," and a signature on some divorce papers. I just let him. A few months later, he throws this massive bash to announce he's getting hitched to his new secretary on the same beach where we said our vows. You've got to be kidding me. I rocked up with a quiet smile and an envelope. The old man's will was crystal clear. Dump his wife, lose the entire fortune. The silence after I told him was only broken by the new fiancé's blood-curdling scream. I stood at the edge of Brighton Beach, watching 200 guests celebrate my ex-husband's engagement to his secretary. The same stretch of sand where Ethan and I had exchanged vows 17 years ago now hosted his new beginning with Sophia Chen. The manila envelope in my hand contained a single document, a copy of Richard's will that Ethan had never bothered to read. Inside, a clause that would cost him $23 million. He just didn't know it yet. I adjusted my sunglasses and began walking toward the white pavilions, my heels sinking into the sand with each deliberate step. But I should explain how I got here, standing at this beach with the power to destroy everything Ethan valued. 3 months earlier, before the divorce papers, before I knew about Sophia, I was still playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. Our life operated on invisible schedules I'd memorized like scripture. Thursday evenings meant salmon dinner at 7:30 sharp. Ethan would walk through the door at 7:15, giving himself exactly enough time to change out of his suit and scan his emails before sitting down at the table. That particular Thursday, the last one we'd share as a married couple, though I didn't know it then, I noticed his new cologne before I heard his footsteps. For 15 years, he'd worn the same woody scent I'd bought him. Then, suddenly, 3 months ago, he'd switched to something more aggressive, something that announced his presence rather than complimented it. "Smells good," he said about the dinner, already scrolling through his phone. A text made him smile slightly, before he caught himself and returned his face to its usual mask of professional indifference. I'd spent the afternoon preparing for the Harrison Foundation Gala, our law firm's premier charity event. 3 hours on the phone with vendors, another 2 hours revising the seating chart to keep competing partners separated. 40 minutes memorizing the names of new associates' spouses and their children. Ethan would show up at the last minute, deliver a speech I'd helped him write, and accept praise for an event he'd barely thought about. "Did you remember that Susan Harrison's daughter just got into medical school?" I asked, setting his water glass at exactly 2 o'clock from his plate, the way he preferred. He responded, not looking up from his screen. 6 months earlier, he would have made a mental note, would have asked which medical school, would have prepared a congratulations for when he saw Susan. These carefully maintained relationships had elevated his career from junior associate to senior partner. Now they seemed beneath his notice. The warning signs had started small. First came the gym membership. Ethan had spent our entire marriage mocking men who wasted billable hours exercising. Then, suddenly, he was leaving the house at 5:30 a.m. for workouts, hiring a 28-year-old personal trainer named Brad, who texted him motivation quotes that made him smile at his phone. His suits grew tighter across the shoulders. He started checking his reflection in every window we passed. Then came the business trips that didn't align with his cases. The receipt from Lou Bernardin that fell from his pocket when he'd supposedly been at a partners meeting. The unexplained charges at jewelry stores on our credit card statement. Each piece of evidence felt like finding a single puzzle piece without knowing what picture it belonged to. Richard, Ethan's father, noticed before I did. We'd developed an unexpected friendship over the years, born from Ethan's neglect of both of us. It started when Ethan forgot our anniversary lunch, leaving me sitting alone at a restaurant for an hour. Richard had walked in for his own lunch meeting, saw me there, and his face had crumbled with recognition and shame for his son. "Let me at least buy you lunch," he'd said, sliding into Ethan's empty chair, though I can't make up for my son's thoughtlessness. That lunch turned into coffee the following week, then regular Thursday meetings at a quiet cafe near his office in Sydney. Richard was everything Ethan wasn't. Attentive, warm, actually interested in my thoughts, rather than just my ability to organize his life. He told me stories about Ethan's mother, Eleanor, who died 8 years ago. How she'd also spent decades managing the invisible labor of being married to an ambitious man. How he'd realized too late what she'd sacrificed for his success. "Eleanor would have loved you," Richard told me one Thursday, 3 weeks before Ethan asked for the divorce. "She would have seen what I see, a woman giving everything to a man who doesn't deserve it." I'd laughed it off then, uncomfortable with the implied criticism of Ethan. "Marriage is about compromise," I'd said, the words tasting false even as I spoke them. "No," Richard had replied firmly. "Marriage is about partnership. What you have is servitude, dressed up in designer clothes." Those designer clothes were another sign. Ethan had suddenly decided my wardrobe needed updating. Not for me, but for how I reflected on him. Out went the comfortable classic pieces I'd worn for years. In came structured dresses and uncomfortable heels that he said made me look more like a senior partner's wife should look. "The Morrison cocktail party is Thursday," Ethan announced that final morning, not asking if I was free, just assuming I'd rearrange my schedule. "I have book club Thursday," I said, testing him. He looked at me then, really looked at me for the first time in months, and his expression was one of mild irritation mixed with surprise, as if the furniture had suddenly spoken. "Cancel it," he said simply. "This is important." Everything Ethan did was important. Every meeting, every dinner, every golf game that might lead to a new client. My book club, my friends, my interests. These were obstacles to be managed, not priorities to be considered. Standing here now at his engagement party, watching him laugh with his senior partners, his hand possessively on Sophia's waist, I realized those 17 years hadn't been a marriage. They'd been an elaborate performance where I'd memorized my lines so well that I'd forgotten I was acting. The manila envelope in my hand wasn't just about revenge or money. It was about finally stepping off the stage I'd been performing on and watching the entire theater collapse without its most essential support. The white pavilions fluttered in the ocean breeze as I approached the gathering, but my mind pulled me back to that Thursday evening 3 months ago, when everything shifted. I could still hear the mechanical precision of plates sliding into the dishwasher rack, each movement deliberate and calculated, as if Ethan had rehearsed this moment in his mind. The kitchen had felt smaller that night, the walls pressing in as he spoke, without turning around. "I'm done, Chloe. I want a divorce." 5 words delivered to the back of his head. I'd been holding a glass of Malbec, and I remember watching the wine tremble, tiny ripples disturbing its surface. The refrigerator hummed louder than usual, or maybe the silence between us amplified every sound. There was a water stain on the ceiling I'd never noticed before, shaped like a question mark, and I focused on it while my marriage dissolved in the space between the dishwasher and the kitchen island. "That's it?" My voice had come out steady, which seemed to surprise both of us. 17 years and you're done?" Ethan finally turned then, wiping his hands on the dish towel with the same methodical care he applied to everything. His expression was closed off, professional, the face he wore for difficult client meetings. "We both know this hasn't been working," he said, folding the towel into a perfect square. "It's better to be honest about it." The conversation lasted exactly 12 minutes. I know, because I watched the microwave clock the entire time. Green numbers marking the systematic destruction of everything we'd built. Ethan outlined his plan with the efficiency of a corporate merger. He'd already consulted a lawyer, already found an apartment, already calculated the division of assets. The precision of it told me this wasn't a sudden decision. This was months of planning delivered in minutes. Over the following 2 weeks, Ethan dismantled our life with surgical precision. He packed only when I was at the grocery store on Tuesday mornings or during my Thursday book club. I'd come home to gaps in the closet, empty spaces where his shoes had been, hangers swaying slightly as if disturbed by ghosts. He took his grandfather's Rolex, but left the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. He packed his law books, but abandoned the novels we'd read together during our early years. The wedding ring appeared on the bathroom counter on a Wednesday morning, placed beside his electric toothbrush like an afterthought. No note, no ceremony, just a circle of platinum catching the morning light. I picked it up and felt its weight, remembering how he'd fumbled putting it on my finger at our beach ceremony, his hands shaking with what I'd thought was emotion, but now wondered if it was just performance anxiety. I moved to the guest room, unable to face the indentation his body had left on his side of our bed. But his presence lingered everywhere. Dark hairs in the shower drain that I couldn't bring myself to clean. The smell of his aftershave clinging to the bathroom towels. The coffee mug he'd used that final morning still sitting in the sink because washing it felt like erasing him completely. Our neighbor, Linda, pretended not to notice when Ethan's BMW stopped appearing in the driveway. She'd wave at me while walking her dog, her smile tight with the discomfort of witnessed failure. The mailman started leaving packages on the doorstep without knocking, as if divorce might be contagious. Even the house seemed to exhale differently, expanding into spaces Ethan had occupied, testing its new dimensions. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, exactly 2 weeks after Ethan's announcement. The courier was young, maybe 20, and his discomfort was palpable as he asked for my signature. "Have a nice day," he mumbled, practically running back to his truck. I carried the envelope to Ethan's former study, now just a room with empty bookshelves and a desk too large for the space. The papers were exactly what I'd expected. Clean division of assets. The house would be mine, along with half our investments. Monthly maintenance payments that suggested guilt more than generosity. 23 pages, reducing 17 years to line items and subclauses. My sister Emily called while I was reviewing page 12. "Fight him," she said without preamble. "Get a lawyer. Take him for everything." "He's being fair," I replied, running my finger along the terms. "Fair? He's leaving you for someone else, isn't he?" I hadn't told her about my suspicions about the receipts and the cologne and the gym membership, but Emily had been through her own divorce 5 years ago and could smell infidelity through the phone. "Does it matter?" I asked, echoing Ethan's own words. "Of course it matters. Don't just roll over, Chloe." But I wasn't rolling over. Something in my gut told me to wait, to watch, to let Ethan think he was controlling this narrative. I pulled out the Mont Blanc pen he'd given me for our 10th anniversary, a gift presented over dinner in Tuscany when he'd still looked at me like I mattered. The irony of signing divorce papers with his anniversary gift wasn't lost on me, but there was something poetic about it, like closing a circle. Each signature was deliberate. Chloe Mitchell. Chloe Mitchell. By the 15th signature, the name started to feel foreign. By the 20th, I was already thinking of myself as Chloe Harrison, my maiden name waiting to be reclaimed. 3 days after I returned the signed papers, I met Richard at our usual coffee shop. His hand shook as he lifted his cup, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. The anger radiating from him was palpable, filling the space between us with electric tension. "Tell me what happened," he said, though his tone suggested he already knew. I explained Ethan's announcement, his methodical exit, the swift divorce proceedings. With each detail, Richard's jaw tightened further, his knuckles white around the ceramic mug. "Did he give you a reason?" "He said it wasn't working anymore." Richard's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to draw looks from other patrons. "That's what his grandfather said when he left his grandmother, almost word for word." I hadn't known that story, and the parallel sent a chill through me. "There's someone else, isn't there?" Richard asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Most likely." He reached across the table and took my hand, his touch gentle, despite his obvious rage. "You deserved better. Chloe, you've always deserved better than what my son was capable of giving." We sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop noise fading around us. Richard's thumb traced small circles on my hand, a paternal gesture that made my eyes burn with unshed tears. "I failed him somehow," Richard said quietly. "Failed to teach him what really matters. Eleanor would be devastated to see what he's become." "This isn't your fault," I assured him, squeezing his hand. But Richard's expression suggested he knew something I didn't, carried some knowledge about his son that went deeper than a failed marriage. Looking back now, standing at this engagement party with his will in my hands, I understood that Richard had already been planning his own form of justice. Richard's words hung in the air of the coffee shop as we parted ways that afternoon, his promise that Ethan would face consequences someday, feeling hollow in the moment. I drove home through streets that seemed unchanged, despite my world having shifted completely. The house waited for me, still filled with Ethan's choices, his aesthetic, his need for everything to appear perfect from the outside. The next morning, I stood in the living room with a cup of coffee, really seeing the space for the first time in years. Everything was white, gray, and black. Ethan had hired an interior designer 5 years ago who'd stripped away anything that might be considered warm or personal. The walls were gallery white, the furniture angular and uncomfortable, the art abstract pieces chosen for their investment value rather than any emotional connection. It looked like a high-end hotel lobby, beautiful in photographs, but impossible to relax in. I set down my coffee and picked up a throw pillow, one of 6 identical gray squares arranged with military precision on the couch. Without thinking, I hurled it across the room. It hit the wall with a satisfying thump, knocking askew one of Ethan's precious abstract prints. The crooked frame looked better somehow, more honest. By noon, I'd driven to 3 different furniture stores, not shopping so much as gathering courage. The salesperson at the 3rd store, a woman about my age with paint under her fingernails, understood immediately. "Starting over?" she asked gently. "Something like that." "Then you need color. You need softness. You need things that make you smile when you walk into a room." Over the next 2 weeks, the transformation was radical. The white walls became warm terracotta in the living room, soft sage in the bedroom, a bold turquoise in what had been Ethan's study. I bought an overstuffed sectional in rich burgundy velvet that Ethan would have despised, throw pillows in jewel tones, curtains that actually blocked light instead of just looking architectural. Plants appeared everywhere: monstera, pothos, fiddle leaf figs, creating the controlled chaos of actual life. Linda from next door knocked one afternoon while I was hanging wind chimes on the porch. "Chloe, I hardly recognized the place when I walked by," she said, peering through the doorway. "Hey, I let her inside, watching her expression shift from polite interest to genuine surprise. "It's so warm now," she breathed, running her hand along the new chenille throw draped over the couch. "I never wanted to say anything before, but Your house always felt like a museum. Beautiful, but don't touch anything. That was the point, I think. I admitted. Ethan wanted to impress people, not welcome them. 2 months had passed in this renovation therapy when my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification on a Saturday morning. I almost ignored it. I'd been avoiding social media since the divorce, but the preview showed Sophia Chen's name. Curiosity won. The image stopped me cold. There was Ethan, tanned and smiling on the beach at Brighton. Our beach. The place where we'd exchanged vows 17 years ago, where we'd returned for anniversaries until he'd become too busy. Sophia's left hand rested on his chest, displaying a diamond ring that caught the sunset light. The caption read, "He proposed at sunset. Can't wait to celebrate with everyone at our engagement party this weekend. Same perfect spot where love found us." My coffee mug slipped, catching the edge of the counter before I steadied it. The comments were already flooding in. Heart emojis, congratulations colleagues from Ethan's firm celebrating the happy news. The timestamp showed the photo was posted an hour ago, but when had the actual proposal happened? I did the math quickly. We'd been divorced for exactly 10 weeks, which meant Ethan had been planning this new future while still sleeping beside me. I scrolled through Sophia's profile with the focus of a detective. There, 3 months ago, a photo from Sydney. "Conference life," she'd captioned it, but I remembered that weekend. Ethan had gone to Sydney for depositions, had called me from his hotel to say goodnight. In the corner of Sophia's photo, I could see a man's watch on the nightstand. Ethan's Rolex. 4 months ago, a picture of her at a restaurant I recognized. La Bernardine, the receipt I'd found in Ethan's pocket. She'd photographed her dessert, but in the reflection of a spoon, I could make out Ethan's profile. 5 months ago, wearing a necklace I'd never seen before, one that matched charges on our credit card statement I'd questioned. Ethan had claimed it was a client gift he'd forgotten to expense. The pattern was clear. While I'd been managing his life, planning his dinners, maintaining his image, he'd been building a completely different existence with a woman half his age. But it was the ring that made me grab my phone and dial a number I hadn't used in years. "Aunt Margaret," I said when Ethan's mother's sister answered. "It's Chloe. I need to ask you something about Eleanor's jewelry collection." Margaret had never liked Ethan, had been vocal about it at family gatherings until Ethan stopped inviting her. "What about it, dear?" she asked, her voice warm, despite the years of distance. The emerald-cut diamond ring with the Art Deco setting. Ethan said it was lost when you moved Eleanor's things. There was a long pause. Lost? That ring has been in the family for 90 years. Eleanor specifically wanted it saved for... She stopped. "Why are you asking?" I texted her the photo of Sophia's hand. The silence stretched so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. "That's it," Margaret said, her voice shaking with anger. "That's Eleanor's mother's ring. Ethan told me he was having it reset for your anniversary." That was 8 months ago. 8 months. Before the gym membership, before the new cologne, before any signs I'd noticed. He'd been planning his exit while I was still believing in our future. I was sitting in my newly colorful living room, still processing this timeline of deception, when the doorbell rang at 7 that evening. Through the peephole, I saw Richard standing on my porch, his face drawn and serious, holding what looked like documents against his chest. "I'm sorry to come by so late," he said when I opened the door, "but there's something you need to know." He paused in the entryway, his eyes taking in the transformation. The white walls were gone, replaced with warm earth tones. The uncomfortable modern furniture had given way to pieces that invited you to sit, to stay, to actually live in the space. "You've made it a home again," he said softly, running his hand along the restored wooden banister I'd uncovered beneath Ethan's industrial metal addition. Eleanor would have loved this. What did you need to tell me? I asked, though something in his expression made my pulse quicken. He pulled a manila folder from inside his coat, his hands trembling slightly as he held it out to me. 8 years ago, after Eleanor passed, I made some changes to my will. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you about them. Richard's expression held something deeper than just anger about the divorce, a weight that made the air between us feel charged with unspoken knowledge. He pulled a folded document from his inner jacket pocket, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he were handling something precious and dangerous simultaneously. The paper trembled slightly in his weathered hands as he spread it on the coffee shop table between us, pushing aside our barely touched cups. 8 years ago, after Eleanor passed, I made some changes to my estate planning. He began, his voice low enough that I had to lean forward to hear him. I was watching Ethan even then, seeing patterns that disturbed me. The way he treated you at Eleanor's funeral, more concerned about the reading of her will than comforting anyone. The way he calculated the value of her jewelry before her body was even cold. The highlighted section seemed to pulse on the page, yellow marker bleeding through the legal text. Richard's finger, steady despite his earlier shaking, pointed to a paragraph dense with terminology. I read it once, the words sliding past without meaning, my brain refusing to process what seemed impossible. The second reading made my breath catch. By the third, my hands were gripping the edge of the table hard enough to leave marks. In the event that my son, Ethan James Mitchell, initiates divorce proceedings against his spouse, Chloe Mitchell, without documented evidence of adultery on her part, all inheritance rights shall be forfeit. The language continued outlining specifics, but that first sentence contained everything that mattered. "This can't be legal," I whispered, looking up at Richard's grim face. My estate attorney spent 3 months making sure it was ironclad. Every word chosen specifically, every loophole closed. Richard's satisfaction was bitter, tinged with the sadness of a father who'd felt the need to protect me from his own son. The clause only applies if Ethan initiates the divorce. If you had filed, or if he could prove infidelity, the inheritance would remain intact. My mind raced, calculating dates and timeline. Ethan had filed for divorce exactly 2 weeks after his announcement, his name on every document as the petitioner. No mention of adultery, no accusations of misconduct, just irreconcilable differences and a swift division of existing assets. He'd been in such a hurry to move forward with Sophia that he'd never considered there might be consequences beyond our current bank accounts. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, though part of me already knew it would be substantial. Richard had built his investment firm from nothing, had patents from his engineering days, owned properties across Melbourne. "The current valuation is approximately $23 million, Richard said, his tone matter-of-fact, despite the astronomical figure. "That includes the investment portfolio at around $15 million, the commercial properties in downtown Melbourne, worth $6 million, the family business shares, and various other assets including Eleanor's art collection." The number felt abstract, impossible. Ethan had grown up expecting this fortune, had built his entire life around the certainty of inheriting his father's empire. Every career move, every calculated relationship, every sacrifice he demanded from me had been in service of maintaining his position as sole heir. "He's never read it," Richard continued, a note of disgust creeping into his voice. "I've asked him multiple times over the years to review the estate documents, to understand his responsibilities. He always brushed it off, said he trusted me to handle things fairly. What he meant was he assumed everything would automatically flow to him." My phone buzzed on the table, an Instagram notification. Sophia Chen had tagged Ethan in another post. this time a photo of wedding venues. The caption read, "Narrowing down our dream location. Can't wait to start our perfect life together." The casual cruelty of it, the public display of their relationship while our divorce ink was barely dry, made my stomach turn. Richard saw my screen, and his jaw clenched. "The engagement party is this Saturday at Brighton Beach. She sent me an invitation, can you believe that? To the same beach where you and Ethan married." The poetic cruelty of it was breathtaking. Ethan proposing to his secretary at the site of our vows, erasing 17 years with a new promise in the same sand where we'd stood barefoot and full of hope. But now, with this document between us, the location took on new meaning. It would be the place where Ethan's carefully constructed future would collapse. "I should be there," I said slowly, the plan forming even as I spoke. To deliver this information. Richard's eyes gleamed with something between pride and vengeance. "I was hoping you'd say that. I could do it myself, but coming from you with all those witnesses present, the impact would be devastating." We spent the next hour strategizing, our coffee growing cold as we mapped out the approach. Richard would have his attorney prepare official documentation, properly notarized and sealed. I would arrive during the party, not before when I might be turned away, not after when the moment would be lost. Richard offered to accompany me to stand beside me as I delivered the news, but I declined. "This is something I need to do alone," I explained, and he understood. This wasn't about requiring support or protection. This was about standing on my own feet and watching Ethan realize that the docile wife he'd discarded held the power to dismantle everything. That evening I stood before my closet, selecting each piece of my outfit with military precision. The white sundress that moved like water, suggesting grace rather than grief. Ethan had always preferred me in dark colors, professional blacks and grays that wouldn't draw attention from him. The flowing white fabric would make me impossible to ignore. My mother's gold jewelry came out of storage, pieces Ethan had deemed too ethnic, too traditional for his corporate world. The delicate chains and intricate earrings caught the light, each piece a connection to the heritage he'd asked me to minimize. The oversized sunglasses weren't just for mystery, but for control. Whatever emotions I might feel walking onto that beach, they would remain hidden behind designer frames. I practiced in front of the mirror, not just my entire demeanor, the slight smile that suggested confidence without aggression. The way I would hold the envelope, casual but visible. The tone I would use, pleasant and calm, as if discussing weather rather than destruction. This would be the performance of my lifetime. 17 years of playing Ethan's perfect wife, transformed into one moment of perfect justice. Richard called that night to confirm everything was arranged. "The attorney will have the official letters ready for Monday delivery to Ethan's office," he said. "But your appearance at the party, that's what will make this memorable." As I hung up, I thought about the Ethan I'd fallen in love with 20 years ago. The ambitious law student who'd promised me partnership, not servitude. Somewhere between his first promotion and his father's growing fortune, that person had disappeared, replaced by someone who saw people as assets to be managed or discarded. Saturday wouldn't just be about revealing the will's clause. It would be about showing Ethan that the asset he'd discarded had been the one keeping his future intact. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline California sunshine that made everything look like a film set. I drove toward Brighton with the windows down, letting the salt air tangle my carefully styled hair, knowing I could fix it when I arrived. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, its corners perfectly sharp, the weight of it somehow heavier than paper should be. My phone showed 3 missed calls from my sister Emily, but I couldn't talk to anyone right now. This moment required complete focus. The beach parking lot was already crowded with luxury vehicles when I arrived at 4:30. Mercedes, BMWs, a few Teslas, and Ethan's precious new Porsche positioned prominently near the entrance. I parked my modest Holden between a Range Rover and an Audi, remembering how Ethan used to complain about my car not fitting his image. Today, that simplicity felt like strength. The transformation of the beach was remarkable in its extravagance. White silk pavilions dotted the sand like expensive mushrooms, each one perfectly positioned to catch the ocean breeze without collapsing. The main tent stretched across what must have been 40 feet of beach, its peaks reaching toward the sky in architectural defiance of nature. Beneath it, round tables draped in cream linens held centerpieces of white orchids and pale blue hydrangeas, each arrangement probably costing more than most people's weekly groceries. I recognized the caterer immediately. Maison Blanc had done our 10th anniversary party. The owner, Marie, greeting me personally back then, complimenting my menu choices. Now her staff moved efficiently through the space, carrying trays of champagne and delicate canapes that I knew without tasting would be perfect. The string quartet was setting up near the waterline, and as they began their sound check, the opening notes of Pachelbel's canon drifted across the sand. Our wedding song, the same arrangement we'd used 17 years ago when I'd walked barefoot through the same sand toward a younger Ethan who'd cried when he saw me. The florist was another familiar face. David from Botanical Dreams had created our wedding arrangements, understanding instinctively that I wanted wildness contained rather than formal structure. Now his team was placing the final touches on arrangements that looked nothing like what we'd chosen together. These were Sophia's choices, all rigid lines and controlled beauty, orchids imprisoned in geometric vases. I adjusted my sunglasses and began walking toward the main gathering, my heels sinking slightly with each step. The sand was already warm despite the ocean breeze, and I could feel eyes beginning to track my movement. The first recognition came from Samantha Davis, one of the partners' wives, who'd been to our house for dinner at least 20 times over the years. Her champagne glass paused halfway to her lips, her eyes widening behind designer frames. "Chloe," she said, loud enough that several heads turned. I smiled warmly. "Samantha, how lovely to see you. You look wonderful." She struggled for words, her gaze darting between me and the main tent where Ethan held court. Behind her, I caught sight of Tom and Sam, two junior partners from Ethan's firm who'd spent countless Sunday afternoons watching football in our living room. They exchanged glances, and Tom actually took a step backward, as if my presence might be contagious. The ripple effect began immediately. Conversations halted mid-sentence, champagne flutes lowered, heads turned to track my progress across the sand. I recognized so many faces from 17 years of carefully cultivated relationships. There was Dr. Morrison from the country club, whose affair with his dental hygienist I'd never mentioned to anyone. Sandra Phillips from the charity board, who'd cried in my kitchen after her son's drug arrest, trusting me to keep her secret. Michael Chen from Ethan's firm, who'd once drunkenly confessed his gambling debts at our Christmas party. They all watched me now with expressions ranging from shock to discomfort, to something that might have been guilty recognition. These people who'd chosen Ethan's side in the divorce, who'd stopped returning my calls, who'd unfriended me on social media with surgical precision. They stood frozen, unsure how to process my appearance at Ethan's engagement celebration. I continued walking, my path steady and deliberate. Near the main tent, I spotted the core group. Ethan stood at the center, his back to me, gesturing as he told what was undoubtedly a story about his latest courtroom victory. Sophia hung on his arm, her laugh tinkling across the space like broken glass. She wore a white designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the fabric clinging in ways that suggested architecture rather than clothing. Her dark hair was pulled into an elegant chignon, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. It was Sophia who saw me first. Her practiced smile, the one she'd perfected in countless Instagram photos, froze into something resembling a mask. The champagne glass in her free hand trembled slightly, sending ripples through the golden liquid. She tugged at Ethan's sleeve, her manicured nails digging into his jacket. "Ethan," she whispered, but her voice carried in the sudden quiet that had descended around their group. He turned with the measured control of someone used to managing juries, his expression shifting through a calculated sequence of emotions. Surprise first quickly suppressed, then annoyance smoothed into professional neutrality. Finally, a forced smile that didn't reach his eyes, the kind he used for difficult clients. "Chloe," he said, his voice carrying intentionally, making sure everyone heard him acknowledge me first. "This is unexpected." Behind him, I noticed Daniel Chen, Ethan's managing partner, and the puzzle pieces suddenly clicked into place. Daniel's features, the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw, the family resemblance to Sophia was unmistakable now that I was looking for it. Daniel Chen wasn't just Ethan's boss, he was Sophia's uncle. The rapid promotion Ethan had received, Sophia's position as his secretary, despite her limited experience, the favorable treatment Ethan had been receiving at the firm, it all made sense now. Daniel stepped forward slightly, positioning himself protectively near Sophia. His expression was wary, calculated, the face of a man who understood that personal drama could quickly become professional disaster. He knew why his niece was really with Ethan, knew about the expected inheritance that would secure her future and, by extension, benefit his own position. "Mrs. Mitchell," Daniel said carefully, still using my married name as if to establish boundaries. "It's Ms. Harrison now," I corrected gently. "I've gone back to my maiden name." The correction landed like a small bomb in the group. Sophia's grip on Ethan's arm tightened, her knuckles white against his navy jacket. Around us, the party continued in muted tones, guests pretending to converse, while obviously straining to hear every word of our exchange. The string quartet had stopped their warm-up, uncertain whether to begin playing or wait. The servers had slowed their circulation, hovering at the edges of the scene with forgotten trays. 200 guests, all connected to Ethan's professional world, all watching to see how he would handle this unexpected arrival of his discarded past at his gleaming future celebration. The beach that had witnessed our beginning would now witness something else entirely, though they didn't know it yet. The silence stretched between us, taut as a wire, while 200 guests held their collective breath. Ethan's jaw worked silently, and I could see him calculating his next move with the same precision he used in court. He stepped toward me, his hand reaching out as if to guide me by the elbow, a gesture he'd perfected over years of steering me through social situations. "Perhaps we could discuss this somewhere more private," he said, his voice pitched loud enough to suggest reasonableness to our audience, while attempting to maintain control. I remained perfectly still, letting his hand hover in the air between us until he was forced to lower it. The envelope in my hand felt warm against my palm, as if the documents inside were alive with their own energy. "Oh, I won't take much of your time," I said, my voice pleasant and clear, carrying across the beach with the same projection I'd learned hosting his corporate events. I just wanted to deliver something in person. It seemed appropriate, given the setting. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, but his professional smile remained fixed. Behind him, Daniel Chen shifted his weight, his business instincts clearly warning him that something significant was about to unfold. Sophia's grip on Ethan's arm had become almost desperate, her knuckles white against his navy jacket, her breathing shallow and quick. "What is this about, Chloe?" Ethan asked, attempting to inject authority into his tone. I pulled the document from the envelope with deliberate care, the official seal catching the late afternoon sunlight. "It's about your father's will, Ethan. Specifically, the moral clause he added 8 years ago." The words landed like stones dropped into still water, ripples of shock spreading through the assembled crowd. Several phones appeared in hands, held at angles that suggested recording rather than checking messages. Ethan's colleague Michael actually stepped closer, his expression shifting from discomfort to intense interest. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's voice had lost its measured control, rising slightly in pitch. "The clause is quite specific." I continued holding the document where he could see it, but not quite reach it. "If you initiated divorce proceedings against me without documented proof of infidelity on my part, you forfeit your entire inheritance. Everything transfers to your mother's cancer research foundation." The blood drained from Ethan's face so quickly that for a moment I thought he might faint. His mouth opened, then closed, no sound emerging. Behind him, I heard Samantha Davis gasp, her champagne glass slipping from her fingers to land soundlessly in the sand. "That's not possible," Ethan managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Your father's attorney confirmed it's completely binding," I said, maintaining my calm tone, despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. $23 million, Ethan. The investment portfolio, the commercial properties, the business shares, all of it. Daniel Chen stepped forward, his business mind clearly racing through the implications. A senior partner without his expected inheritance was a very different asset to the firm. His movement seemed to break Sophia from her frozen state. She lunged forward, snatching the document from my hand with such force that one of her acrylic nails caught and tore. Her eyes moved frantically across the page, her lips moving silently as she read. The designer dress that had looked so elegant moments before now seemed to constrict her breathing, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she processed the legal language. "This is fake," she said, her voice high and desperate. "This has to be fake. Tell them it's fake, Ethan." But Ethan stood frozen, his legal mind undoubtedly recognizing the authentic formatting, the official seals, the language that matched his father's attorney's style. His silence was more damning than any confession could have been. Sophia's eyes darted between the document and Ethan's ashen face, searching for denial that wouldn't come. She stumbled backward, her designer heel catching in the sand and snapping with an audible crack. She kicked off both shoes violently, standing barefoot in the sand, the document crumpling in her clenched fist. "You told me," she began, her voice rising with each word. "You promised me that everything was yours, the fortune, the properties, the future you sold me on." "Sophia, please." Ethan reached for her, but she jerked away, nearly colliding with a server carrying a tray of champagne. $23 million. She was screaming now, all pretense of elegance abandoned. "You let me plan a life, a future based on money you don't even have." And the sound that emerged from her throat next was primal, a scream of pure rage that sent the seagulls that had been peacefully circling overhead scattering in all directions. Guests stumbled backward, creating an expanding circle around us, their faces masks of shock and barely concealed fascination. Someone's champagne glass shattered against a rock, the sound sharp in the aftermath of Sophia's scream. "You lied to me." She threw the crumpled document at Ethan's chest, where it bounced off and landed in the sand between them. "Everything was contingent on that money. My uncle vouched for you because of your inheritance." Daniel Chen's face had turned an alarming shade of purple, his professional reputation now tangled in this spectacular public humiliation. He moved toward his niece, perhaps to quiet her, but she rounded on him with equal fury. "You knew," she accused, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You had to have known something was wrong. You did the background checks when Ethan joined the firm." The revelation sent another ripple through the crowd. Background checks that had missed a $23 million contingency. The other partners from Ethan's firm exchanged meaningful glances, their faith in Daniel's judgment visibly crumbling. Ethan finally found his voice reaching for Sophia again. "We can talk about this. There might be ways to contest." "Contest?" Sophia laughed, but the sound was hollow, bitter. "With what money? You just became worthless to me, to the firm, to everyone here." She grabbed her purse from a nearby table, knocking over a centerpiece in the process. Water and orchids spilled across the white linen, creating a spreading stain that looked like surrender. The string quartet had long since stopped playing, their instruments held uselessly as they watched the drama unfold. The caterers stood frozen with their trays, unsure whether to continue service or retreat entirely. "The notification from Richard's attorney will arrive at your office Monday morning," I said into the chaos, my voice cutting through the murmurs and gasps. "I thought you deserved to hear it first, considering the circumstances." Ethan turned to me then, his eyes holding a mix of rage and something that might have been grudging respect. He'd been outmaneuvered not by aggressive tactics or legal warfare, but by his own arrogance and assumptions. The paradise he'd built with Sophia on this beach that held our history had crumbled in less than 5 minutes. Around us, the perfect engagement party continued its collapse. Sophia was stumbling toward the parking lot, her uncle hurrying after her, their raised voices carrying back on the ocean breeze. Guests were already pulling out phones, not even pretending to be discreet, as they texted and called, spreading the news through Sydney's legal community like wildfire. Ethan stood alone in the center of what had been his triumph, surrounded by the debris of his ambitions. I turned from Ethan's frozen figure and began my walk back across the sand, each step deliberate and measured. The white sundress moved around my legs with the ocean breeze, and I could feel the weight of 200 pairs of eyes following my progress. My heels sank deeply into the sand with each step, leaving perfect impressions that the incoming tide would soon erase. But for now, they marked my path away from 17 years of marriage and toward something I couldn't yet name. The crowd parted as I approached, creating a corridor through their expensive clothes and shocked faces. Samantha Davis reached out as if to touch my arm, then thought better of it, her hand dropping to clutch her pearls instead. Tom from Ethan's firm actually nodded at me, a gesture somewhere between respect and acknowledgement, as if he'd just witnessed a masterful closing argument in court. Sandra Phillips mouthed what might have been, "Good on ya," though no sound emerged. Behind me, the chaos continued to unfold. I could hear Sophia's voice carrying on the wind, sharp bursts of anger mixed with what sounded like sobbing. Ethan's voice rose occasionally, trying to restore order, to manage the situation the way he managed everything else in his life. But some things couldn't be managed, controlled, or negotiated away. Some consequences arrived with the force of natural law. Michael Chen stepped directly into my path, his expression unreadable. For a moment I thought he might say something, might try to defend Ethan, or condemn me for my timing. Instead, he moved aside with something approaching a bow, a gesture of recognition for what I'd just accomplished. As I passed, I heard him murmur to his wife, "Ethan should have read the will. First rule of law, always read the documents." The sand gave way to pavement as I reached the parking lot, and the solid ground beneath my feet felt like crossing from one world into another. The sounds of the party, the murmuring voices, the distant crash of waves, someone's nervous laughter, began to fade. I could see my Holden ahead, modest and reliable among the luxury vehicles, waiting exactly where I'd left it. My phone buzzed in my purse as I reached the car, I pulled it out to find a message from Richard time-stamped just minutes ago. He must have been watching the clock, knowing approximately when I'd deliver the news. The message was characteristically brief. I trust the delivery went smoothly. Dinner Thursday? My treat as always. The normalcy of it. The casual assumption that our regular dinner would continue despite the bomb I'd just detonated in his son's life made me smile for the first time that day. Not a practiced smile or a strategic one, but something genuine. I typed back quickly. Wouldn't miss it. Your son now knows what he lost. My hands were perfectly steady as I unlocked the car and slid behind the wheel. No trembling, no delayed shock, no sudden rush of regret or doubt. The strange calm that had carried me through the confrontation remained solid as bedrock. This wasn't the shaky equilibrium of suppressed emotion, but something deeper, more fundamental. The peace that comes from finally, fully, standing in your own truth. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, taking one last look at the beach in my rearview mirror. The white pavilions that had looked so elegant an hour ago now seemed like monuments to Ethan's hubris, temporary structures that would be dismantled by morning, leaving no trace they'd ever existed. The ocean continued its eternal rhythm, unconcerned with the human drama playing out on its shores. This same stretch of sand had witnessed our wedding 17 years ago, when I'd walked barefoot through the surf in a simple white dress, believing in forever. The coastal road curved away from the beach, and I followed it past familiar landmarks that felt like mile markers of our relationship. There was Ocean View Restaurant, where Ethan had proposed, down on one knee with a ring he'd chosen without consulting me, so certain I'd say yes that he'd already made reservations for our engagement party. The Seafoam Inn, where we'd spent our wedding night, where he'd carried me across the threshold with promises of partnership and equality that had evaporated like morning mist. Each location I passed felt like shedding another layer of the past, leaving it behind on this stretch of Victorian coastline. The woman who'd driven to the beach an hour ago carrying an envelope and 17 years of accumulated hurt wasn't the same one driving away. That woman had been defined by her relationship to Ethan, as wife, as support system, as the silent foundation of his success. This woman, the one gripping the steering wheel with steady hands, was just Chloe Harrison. No suffix required. The highway opened up before me, and I pressed the accelerator, feeling the Holden respond eagerly. There was something profound in this moment that had nothing to do with Ethan's financial destruction or Sophia's public humiliation. It wasn't about the money he'd lost or the consequences he'd face Monday morning when Richard's attorney made everything official. The truth was simpler and more complex simultaneously. Revenge, I realized, wasn't about actively destroying someone. It wasn't about planning their downfall or orchestrating their humiliation. True revenge was simply stepping back and allowing someone's own choices to play out without the safety net they'd taken for granted. Ethan had built his new life on a foundation of assumptions, that his inheritance was guaranteed, that I would remain the quiet, accommodating ex-wife, that his father would never hold him accountable for his choices. He'd been wrong on all counts, but the wrongness wasn't my doing. I hadn't created the clause in Richard's will. I hadn't forced Ethan to file for divorce. I hadn't made him chase after his secretary or lie about his secured fortune. All I'd done was deliver information he should have known, at a moment when that information would have maximum impact. The rest was simply consequence following cause, as natural and inevitable as waves following the pull of the moon. Traffic was light heading back toward the city, and I found myself thinking about the Thursday dinners with Richard that would continue, the redecorated house waiting for me, the painting classes I'd enrolled in for next month. Life would go on, fuller somehow for having shed the weight of Ethan's expectations and demands. The future, which had seemed so uncertain when he'd announced his desire for divorce, now stretched ahead with possibility. My phone buzzed again, with text messages from Emily, from friends who'd already heard through the lightning-fast gossip network, from numbers I didn't recognize. I ignored them all. There would be time for conversations and explanations later. For now, I drove toward the sunset with the windows down, my hair whipping in the wind, the taste of salt and freedom on my lips. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as I pulled into my driveway. The automatic response of checking my phone, finally winning over my desire for continued silence. 43 messages waited, but I scrolled past most of them, stopping only at one from Michael Chen, sent just 30 minutes after I'd left the beach. Ethan trying damage control. Partners meeting called for Monday morning. Daniel Chen recusing himself from all decisions regarding Ethan's position. Thought you should know. Monday arrived with the kind of dramatic flair Ethan would have appreciated in his old life. According to Samantha Davis, who called me that afternoon, unable to contain herself, Richard's attorney had arrived at the law firm at precisely 9 a.m., requesting to see Ethan in the presence of the senior partners. The envelope he delivered contained not just notification of the inheritance forfeiture, but copies of all relevant documentation, authenticated and notarized, leaving no room for interpretation or hope. Ethan just sat there, Samantha reported, her voice hushed with thrill of witnessed downfall. He didn't say a word for 5 full minutes. Then he asked to be excused and left the building. Security had to box up his office because he never came back. The Cancer Research Foundation that had been Eleanor's passion project released a statement that Tuesday, thanking the Mitchell family for their generous contribution, while carefully avoiding any mention of the circumstances. $23 million would fund research for years, would save lives, would create something meaningful from the wreckage of Ethan's choices. Eleanor would have appreciated the irony her son's selfishness transformed into selfless good. By Wednesday, Sophia Chen had vanished from Melbourne entirely. The movers arrived at Ethan's apartment while he was meeting with attorneys, packing her belongings with the efficiency of people paid to not ask questions. She'd left the engagement ring on the kitchen counter with no note, the diamond catching morning light through the window, beautiful and worthless now that its promise had evaporated. Her Instagram account disappeared, her LinkedIn updated to show a position with the firm's Tokyo office, as far from the scandal as geography allowed. Daniel Chen's response was equally swift and merciless. He issued an internal memo distancing himself from his niece's personal decisions and Ethan's unfortunate circumstances, making it clear that nepotism had played no role in any firm decisions. The fact that everyone knew this was untrue didn't matter. The appearance of propriety had to be maintained. Ethan's cases were redistributed within days, his name removed from the partnership listings, his parking space reassigned to a younger, hungrier associate who still believed in forever. The gossip mill churned through the story with voracious appetite. Each retelling added new details, some true, most embellished. By the end of the week, the story had morphed into something almost mythical. The discarded wife returning like an avenging angel, the greedy secretary fleeing in shame, the fortune lost to hubris. I heard versions where I'd planned it all from the beginning, where Richard and I had conspired together, where Sophia had known about the will and gambled anyway. None of them captured the simple truth that consequences follow actions as surely as shadow follows light. Thursday dinner with Richard continued as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis. We met at our usual restaurant, ordered our usual meals, and talked about everything except Ethan. Richard had aged years and days. the weight of watching his son's destruction evident in new lines around his eyes. But there was also something like peace in his expression. "The foundation called today," he mentioned over dessert. "They want to name a research wing after Eleanor." "She would have loved that," I replied, and meant it. 6 months later, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, I ran into Ethan at a coffee shop near my art class. I almost didn't recognize him at first. The expensive suits had been replaced with khakis and a simple button-down, the kind you could buy at any department store. His Porsche was nowhere to be seen. Through the window, I could see him walking toward an older model Holden, practical and unremarkable. "Chloe," he said, and for the first time in 20 years, he looked directly at me, really saw me. "Hello, Ethan." We stood there for a moment, two people who had once promised forever, now strangers with too much history. He looked older, certainly, but also somehow clearer, as if losing everything had scraped away decades of pretense. "I work at a small firm in the valley now," he offered, unprompted. "Personal injury cases mostly. It's actually interesting when it's about helping people instead of just billing hours." "That's good," I said, and found that I meant it. "I wanted to apologize," he began, then stopped, seeming to realize the inadequacy of words. "Not for your benefit. I know it's too late for that. But I need you to know that I understand now. What I threw away. What I never saw when I had it." I studied his face, searching for the manipulation that had always been there, the calculated words designed to achieve a specific outcome. But there was nothing strategic about his expression, just exhaustion, and something that might have been genuine regret. "Understanding too late is still understanding," I said finally. He nodded, started to say something else, then thought better of it. We parted ways without goodbye, two people walking in opposite directions, finally free of each other's orbits. Thursday dinners with Richard became the cornerstone of my new life. We explored restaurants across the city, talked about books and art and travel, built the kind of relationship I'd always wanted with my own father, but never had. He helped me understand tax implications when I sold some investments, celebrated with me when my first painting sold at a local gallery, listened without judgment when I talked about maybe dating again someday. The house became truly mine through small transformations. Ethan's home office became my art studio, north-facing windows flooding the space with perfect light. The formal dining room we'd use twice a year became a library, filled with books Ethan would have called frivolous. The garden, which had been maintained by services to look perpetually perfect, grew wild with vegetables and flowers that attracted butterflies and bees. Standing in that garden one evening, soil under my fingernails, paint still on my jeans, I understood that the best revenge hadn't been about destroying Ethan at all. It had been about refusing to be destroyed myself, about walking away from that beach, from 17 years of diminishment, toward a life that was entirely, authentically, unapologetically mine. The woman who had stood at Brighton Beach with an envelope full of consequences had been seeking justice. The woman tending tomatoes in her own garden had found something better. She had found herself. If this story of poetic justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Chloe walked across that beach, carrying the envelope that would destroy everything Ethan valued. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.